Hi, it is great to be part of this experience. Thanks, Joanna Rees, for making it possible. I will take advantage to explain some details about the program you have for this term, which is Anglophone literature, the last subject in your training. So I know you have the part of this presentation, but I will explore a bit more some aspect. And it is basically what is related with the historical background and the literary movements. You already have the information of the other parts of the program. And of course, I will highlight at the end what we want to achieve with the lesson plan. So, in this map, you see how English has spread worldwide, and that's why we speak about Anglophone literature. So, no, all literary piece is written by someone, by a person that lives in a social context, and that literary piece, of course, has the influence of what was taking place either by the time it was written or based on what the author wanted to write about. So it is important for the readers to know a bit more what was happening in order to understand the context. So there are some important events that have taken place throughout history that we understand, for example, have influenced our writers. Of course, we have French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution that hasn't stopped, civil wars in many places. I mean, this one is the one from USA, but of course, we can speak about other places as well. We have World War One, Second World War, Industrial Revolution again, because we continue in this process, the Spanish Civil War, communism and capitalism, Cold War, wars in general. Uh, but of course, if we speak, for example, from the literature of Australia, we would have in the historical background perhaps the arrival of the colonizers, the situation, for example, of Aboriginal people and indigenous people of Torres Strait Island as a background of any novel. So there it will vary a bit, but in general terms, this one I would say impact most of the classic literature that we normally look at the 19th and 20th century. So, but besides that, we also have what we call literary movements, okay? And the literary movement, this one is an example from the North American literature. And in here, when I mean North American literature, I refer to USA and Canada. So, for example, from 1600 to 1914, we would call the period of 19th century and before. We have practical beginnings with the arrival of the colonizers, and in there you have representatives such as John Smith, William Bradford, and the Basin book as one of the ones that you can find all the history books in terms of what was happening when the new colonizers arrived. Then we have metaphysical poets and representative with Anne Bradstreet, Edward Taylor, more poetry related to understanding of what was happening in these new places, the first colony that were established in the US, and of course what was going on in Canada. Then we have Enlightenment influences, and then the reading started to change. We have Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Philip Freneau, Hugh Henry, in which there are now writings talking about independence, freedom, etc. Then we have another movement that is called Enlightenment, American styles. And in American styles, we start having this sort of narrative that in a way imitated the European one where the colonized, this society came from, but now they were having more local names. So, for example, we have Washington Irving. Irving wrote normally having Dutch names, but also in the setting was in New York State. So we have Rip Van Winkle, one of the famous story. But of course, he also changed his style later in life. with the Legend of Alhambra, for example, when he was ambassador in Spain. We also have in there James Cooper, another famous writer. He wrote a novel that became a classic, The Last of the Mohican. And another famous person in this movement is Noah Webster, with the first dictionary written in the New World. After that, then we have another movement that is called Transcendentalist. And in there we have Ralph Waldo Emerson with the famous essay, The Wasteland, and Henry Thoreau, who was his student. After that comes a very important literary movement, because in here we have writers that were acknowledged as really creating a new style, and the literature that was could become important as representative of the U.S. and Canada. I can mention in here Edgar Allan Poe. I think most of you are familiar with Edgar Allan Poe, the creator of the detective story genre, classic and horror story, beautiful poems such as Annabel Lee. But we also have The Raven, which is another famous poet, the master of the short story. We have Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote a very famous novel that is called The Scarlet Letter. And Herman Melville, better known because he's the writer of Moby Dick. Another movement then is called New Visions of America, where we find the famous poet Walt Whitman and also Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. A movement that became very important during the Civil War and was reform and liberation, in which we have as representative Harriet Beecher Stowe, the famous writer who presented the book Uncle Stone Cabin. After reform and liberation, a movement as well in parallel that became so prominent because it brought out something that it was the color literature, and it's called regionalism. In here we have representatives as Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, by the pen name Mark Twain. But we also have Chandler Harris, Bret Harte, and William Howells. Okay. Then we also have another one which is very important, hidden poets, in which we find the famous poet Emily Dickinson. By the end of the 19th century, then we arrive to a movement that is called a new wave. So this new wave, we have writers now looking for more aspects related with what was happening inside the human being mind, and this criticism toward exploring new areas. So we have Henry James, uh, Jack London, Stephen Crane, Frank Norris, Edith Wharton. And by the end of 19th century and early 20th century, we have the Sympathetic Views movement. And in here we have Kate Chopin, Gertrude Stein, O. Henry, Willa Cather. In here, particularly Kate Chopin, well known for The Story of an Hour, another short story in which it is presented the oppression some women lived in according to the society in which they live. It was a criticism. She's one of those feminist writers that was also rediscovered in the 60s. When the movement began to be very important and well known. In the 20th century, then we find other characteristics. So we start with a group that is called rebellious spirits. And these rebellious spirits, we have people who started to do critical reviews towards the urban and rural life, what was happening in society in general. In there, we have Sherwood Anderson, Sinclair Lewis. I mean, he's won a Nobel Prize, and Edgar Lee Master. Uh, then the poets. This one is more or less simultaneous to rebellious spirits. And we have Robert Frost. He started exploring in poetry with different way to present with the structure of poetry. Robinson Jeffers and Edwin Arlington Robinson. Then the other movement is called the modernist. And in the modernist, we have T.S. Eliot, William Carlos Williams, Ezra Pound. And again, this group was more from the southern part. And we have new criticism. Robert Penn it's a representative, but it's also called in some literary circles like the fugitives. Perhaps the following, this one, number 5, Lost Generation, is the movement that most people are familiar with because in their all the writers are so became so well known due to the critical position they have strong criticisms towards United States and the position they played during the First World War. So in here we have writers such as Francisco Fitzgerald, uh, better known by the novel The Great Gatsby. We have John Dos Passos, Ernest Hemingway, William Faulkner, Henry Miller, all of them very well known writers. And we also have during all the boom of the jazz movement, Harlem Renaissance, in which we have writers such as Claude McCain, Jim Toomer, Langston Hughes. And finally, we have a movement called New Drama. Why new drama? Because so far there wasn't a drama in the new world that was characteristic to this unique, particularly with the ingredients of the local literature. And what existed before was lots of imitation of the European writers. In this new drama, we have the famous Eugene O'Neill. And Eugene O'Neill, there's one famous short play that is called The Hairy Ape that you might heard because it's one of the suggested reading. We also have Robert Sherwood, Thorndor Wilder, and William Savage. Then we have Depression Realism. Depression Realism, in here we have a group of writers who lived and wrote what was going on with the situation of the Great Depression that took place with the economic crash that took place in the late 1920s. And in there, one of the most well known is John Steinbeck. John Steinbeck, by the beautiful novel The Grapes of Wrath, that depicts all the situation the family lived and experienced, and those who moved from the east to the west. We also have James Thurber. James Thurber, a famous cartoonist and humorist, and in some of his stories he criticized a lot and he depicted women in a negative way. We have Dashiell Hammett and James Cain as well in this movement. Then number 9, we have escapism and war. In escapism and war, we have Margaret Mitchell. She is very well known by a novel that became so famous that it's called Gone with the Wind, that also became, the movie became even much more famous. We have Herman Wouk, James Michener, and Norman Mailer as well in this movement. And following that, we have post-war voices. In post-war voices, there were several groups. Uh, the, we have Eudora Welty, Flannery O'Connor, and Robert Penn Warren, but we also have a new genre that started to be initiated. For example, science fiction with Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov. We have black writers such as Alex Haley with the famous book Roots, Nikki Giovanni. We have the movement of American Jews, where we can find Saul Bellow and Isaac Bashevis Singer. And in drama, we have other two very famous dramatists. They are Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller. Uh, then we arrive to this movement towards a big generation, perhaps maybe the second best known, or together like the lost generation. From the 50s and 60s. Some of them call it that's the time of the opening, the hippie movement, and we have in there very well-known writers such as Alan Ginsberg. You have a poem in the readings suggested, which is American. uh, Ken Kesey with a famous book as well, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Vladimir Nabokov, the famous book Lolita, Robert Lowell, Elizabeth Bishop. I mean, all of them, writing about topics that in the past people wouldn't talk much about. The people wouldn't openly, for example, speak about drugs. And our King Kesey with his big critical issue towards the mental hospital. After that, we have another movement that is called journalistic approaches, and it is this movement that in which we can find novels that are based on real facts. So one of the most well known is Truman Capote because of the book In Cold Blood that is based on a real fact. But we also have other ones such as Norman Mailer and Tom Wolfe. In the 60s, 70s, another movement that is called dark drama. And dark drama, we have, or drama of the absurd, is also referred to. So we have Sam Shepard and Edward Albee. Personal poetry in the 70s, where we can find Alice Walker, and she's also famous by the book The Color Purple. We have Anne Sexton, Sylvia Plath, Adrian Rich, and Toni Morrison. And the last movement is called New American Voices, where we have different groups. We have John Updike, John Irving, William Kennedy, and Tyler, but we also have American Hispanics, Carlos Cortez or Tomas Rivera, also called Chicano, the Chicano writers. We have American Indian, Scott Momadai. We have Chinese American, and different groups that started to emerge in the 80s, 80s and 90s very strongly, but they represent the characteristic of what was going on in the north part of the American continent. So with this is just an example. If we get to know, for example, other areas, let's mention Australia, then you will have different views. For example, in the 80s, there was 80s, 90s, late 80s and 90s. Biographical readings became very, very well known, biographical novels, because it was many stories based on Aboriginal people who started to write about their own story. Well, it is basically because the Aboriginal people became citizens, they got their citizenship in the late 60s. So there is this awakening from then to start writing that it became obvious in the 90s. And again, it will vary according to the regions of the world in which, depending on the social and historical context in which those societies evolve. That's why we also have, for example, post-colonial literature, and it basically looks at those countries that, of course, have the colonizers like masters, and then there is sort of literature in which that is reflected. There are many examples from some African countries, the Caribbean countries, and well, we can also find and in Australia, in New Zealand as well, these examples. So just to briefly mention, then we have from the first part to choose 3 readings, then the second part 3 more readings for this, and in here you have the names of some of the writers I mentioned before, and then you have to choose one long literary piece. You have all the suggested reading you have then in the digital version. You can share that, you can discuss that. Is up to you to decide with your teacher which one you're going to read. I suggest the long literary pieces chosen at the very beginning of the course, so then you can have time to read it and digest it, and get much more information. You have a play from Edward Warner, a British writer. You have another play, Vinegar Town, Carol Churchill, another British writer. And The Cherry Pickers, it's a play from Australia, and this is the first play written by an Aboriginal writer. We have the novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, British writer. My play, Sally Morgan. This is a beauty. I mean, all of them are beauty, but this one is so touchy. It's an autobiography. She's an Aboriginal writer, okay, from Australia. For Whom the Bell Tolls, a classic from Ernest Hemingway, USA. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest from USA. In Cold Blood, Truman Capote. Uncle Stone Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe. Wild Sargasso Sea. In here we have an example of a Caribbean literature, and in examples in there with what we call this post-colonial tradition. This novel, beautiful novel, The Slave Girl by Buchi Mecheta, this Nigerian writer. And well, I hope you really enjoy this course. I mean, I'm passionate about literature, but I'm convinced that through literature you can open your eyes to the world. And our last goal in this course is that you get to use the literary pieces, the short literary pieces that you have in the My Victory series, and you can use them, work with them in high school. So how you can do a lesson plan in order to use literature to teach language. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. And take care of yourself, please. Bye bye.